So after applying a lot of carbon fiber decals to the body and sealing that up nicely with a couple layers of clear, it was time to leave those to cure up for a bit before moving on to finishing those off. So in the meantime, as usual, I move on to the interior or chassis. In this case, I'm starting off with the interior, as that has a lot more parts and a lot more details that needed to be added to. So I firstly just started by sanding them all down, getting them a bit rougher and cleaning them up a bit in that same process as well, before applying a nice coat of primer and then starting on the colors. The first color I'm going to be adding is black to the dashboard. I added a bit of a gray to the black mixture as well to not make it as black, but more of a super dark gray, if you know what I mean. So after I had painted that and all the other components, I let that sit and dry and moved on to the next step, which was applying some gunmetal to some other parts for the seats and interior trim that needed to be done up with some carbon fiber at a later stage. So with that all done, I could just move those aside and move on to the next color, and that is for the aluminum trim, which was painted in light aluminum. In the meantime, all the other parts had enough time to cure, so I masked those off on the sections that did not need to be painted in the Bugatti blue. I'm using a nice bright blue color for the interior. I found this on a reference picture of a real Bugatti that is fully gray on the exterior and has a couple of highlights for this blue on the interior and also some other components, so I stole that idea for my interior as well. I painted it all in the Bugatti blue and all the other parts which were prior painted in the different colors, and got some masking, of course, also got painted in the same blue before removing the masking tape and moving on to the next stage in the build. A lot of you will probably not really be a fan of this Smurf blue interior. I personally really like it, contrasting with the gray body and all the carbon fiber parts. I think it makes it really pop and not just be all dull and black. So better safe than sorry. In my case, I think it turned out pretty well, and I really am a fan of this color combination. For this car, it's pretty wild, but the car itself is pretty wild as well, so I figured why not give it a shot. Now, instead of using a normal flocking for the interior, which I always do, I still had some of this sticky back felt from Model Factory Hero laying around, and I figured it's a nice color, it suits the interior well, and with this piece just being flat and no real curves that needed to be filled up with the carpet, I thought it would be a really good idea to try. So I made a quick template with some masking tape, removed that, transferred it to the felt itself, cut it out, and then could place the felt in place. And that's pretty much all you need to do to it before you have some carpet. Now, this is actually intended for seats, so you can make it as intricate as you want, but I personally liked it for this simple job, as it does really well and it looks like a high quality carpet to be found in cars like this Bugatti. In these Bugatti interiors, you have a lot of options as to come with colors, carbon fiber, or even leather. Now in my case, I decided to not go with the full carbon fiber interior. All the parts that are painted black can also be spec'd in dry carbon. I personally didn't really like it as it was a bit of an overload, and I prefer the leather, and all the other components that still needed to be done in carbon fiber were. So I applied various pieces of carbon on the dashboard in multiple sections, also the backs of the seats and the bottoms of the seats as well. As you can see on the left here, those are all the templates and decals that still need to be placed. I'm not really going to show you this, as I did show you a lot of the body decal application, and I'm saving this for a video at the end of the series with all of the carbon fiber decal application in one video. Pretty much a time lapse and a bit of an in-depth how-to on these carbon fiber decals. A couple hours later, and all the carbon fiber decals were nicely in place, conformed to shape, and finished up. I could then move on to adding a lot of details with some paints here and there. On the gear stick, it needed some detail painting. I'm using a fine brush from Tamiya and carefully applying those Vallejo paints. The main components were nicely detailed and I could move on to assembling them, so I took out my Super Gold Plus CA glue and started gluing some together. For the seat belts, I'm using some Scale Production seat belt material in the black color. I'm just gluing them in with some super glue and then also adding the buckles from the photo etch set that came with the kit itself. The seat bottoms and backs are now glued in place, and I noticed that I forgot a silver bezel on the back of the seats, so I still needed to paint those on. I took out my fine brush from Tamiya again and some Vallejo silver to sort that out. Around the interior there are a lot of photo etch parts that need to be added for details. Also in the door cards you need to add the window controls and also some vents. On the dashboard you need to add a lot of vents and also the speakers, so those were glued in carefully one by one. The air vent pieces were painted black earlier on in the video, and the photo etch pieces, which are silver, need to be glued on top of that. It is a straight piece to begin with, so a small drop of glue in the middle to glue that section in place, and then carefully trying to bend the rest over with my fingers once it is all nice and in place, so I don't have to do it and guess the radius. I can actually just conform it to the piece underneath. After placing all of the photo etch pieces, I could move on to also adding a metal transfer decal with the Bugatti logo on the steering wheel. I carefully centered it and then pressed it in place before removing the protective film. After that was done, I could also add the decals, various logos to the interior for the Chiron on the seats and also on the center console, along with a lot of gauges for on the dashboard. After gluing that final piece of photo etch in place for around the gauge cluster, I could move on to finally assembling all the parts that are now nicely detailed and can go together to finish the interior off. To give you guys a bit of a preview on how it will look with the interior and the body together, I decided to fit the interior together with the body. Now during that stage I noticed that the dashboard couldn't be put in place as I already had glued it to the main interior tub and it needs to be as two separate pieces, so I carefully pulled those back apart as the dashboard needs to slide into the body and then the interior comes in from underneath. If it's all one piece, it doesn't fit, so that's an important thing to note once you're going to build it yourself, if you're of course going to build it yourself.